Hello and welcome back to Journey with Dr. J. I am excited because this is the first video of the first series of this channel, and the series is entitled What Does the Bible and Christianity Have to Say About ... And so the topic we will be discussing is ancestral worship, aka ancestral veneration. But before we get started, I just want to give a lot of love and a huge thank you and express my deepest gratitude for those of you who show me so much love on social media, for those of you who have already subscribed to the channel, for those of you who've commented and started the discussion and just hit me up personally. I am just really grateful for the love and support, and I just wanted to make sure to acknowledge that and send my gratitude back to you. Thank you. Secondly, as we get into this journey and embark on this journey, if you will, I wanted to give a little encouragement to those of you who may be feeling tension while going through this process. And part of the tension is natural and almost necessary. But another part comes from the filter from which you lens from which you filter the information and the knowledge that you gain. And I'll use myself as an example. When I started out on this journey, I felt a lot of tension, right? And what I realized is that it came from me having this filter of European Christianity, and everything I saw was through this lens of European Christianity. Everything I heard was through that same lens. And so when I decided to make that shift and say, hey, I'm going back to the origin, and the origin is African, period. The origin of everything is from Africa. So that's where I'm going. And then I'm going to see where I come to from there. When that happened, and when I made that conscious shift, because you have to be intentional and conscious about it, it really eased a good amount of the tension for me. And I've been able to have peace while continuing on this journey. So I just want to encourage you, if you've been feeling any type of tension, and I have to imagine you are either not just looking at this YouTube channel, other YouTube channels, reading and the like, and you may be experiencing that internally and spiritually. And so I just wanted to encourage you. That's what helped me, and I hope that it helps you. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the video. What does the Bible have to say about ancestral worship, aka ancestral veneration? And you may be wondering, Jalisa, why do you keep putting ancestral worship? Air quotes, worship, because worship is heavily associated with Christianity and the worship of Yahweh, the worship of Jesus Christ. So we are also told as Christians, and you read it in the Bible, you shall not worship anything before me. You shall not put any idol or anything before me. So if you hear the term worship with anything other than Yahweh or Jesus Christ, your Christian antenna already goes like, nope, can't do that. That's wrong. Don't do that. That's not of God. That's evil. Woo, right? So that is why I use worship, because when we get into it, and you'll hear in the rest of this video, that ancestral acknowledgement, veneration, and even communion is a term that I've heard or read, is not the same as worshiping God. It's not. And so I want to get away from using ancestral worship just because it causes that tension and confusion and misunderstanding about what the practice truly is and what it encompasses. So what does the practice encompass? Well, ancestral veneration encompasses quite a few things, but really it's just the acknowledgement and the communion and communication with those in your family who have gone on, who have transitioned from the physical spiritual realm to the unseen spiritual realm, if you will, aka heaven, aka ancestral plane, aka life after death or afterlife, right? Even in Christianity, we know that there is a life after death. That's what we have learned and all of that. And we know that there is a unseen spiritual realm, and we know that we operate within this spiritual realm here, which is physical and seen. And there is a link between the two. And so that is what in the African traditions, it really is about. You have family members, your grandmothers, great grandparents, great uncles, aunts, who were elders in your community or in your family who have passed on and transitioned, and you now keep them close, so to speak. You keep them, you keep in communion with them or communication with them for the well-being of the family, of the clan, of the tribe, of the village, of the community. See what I'm saying? So how does that look? How are they not worship? How does that actually work? Well, in African traditions, in the few that I'm learning about, what I have come to understand is there is a spiritual hierarchy or rank or order, right? And there is a supreme being, God, Most High, creator of all, that is at the top, period. This is in the Igbo tribe or the Igbo tradition out of Nigeria, the Yoruba tradition out of Nigeria, the Akan tradition out of Ghana, the Egyptian tradition, Nile Valley, Nubian tradition on the east side of Africa as well. These are the ones that I'm learning about at this time. And what I've come to see is there is some type of hierarchy or spiritual system, if you will, where the supreme being, whatever that name is at the top. And then you have deities that come below there. And then you may have some other type of heavenly beings here. And then you have ancestors. And then you have us, human beings, right? We are all a part of this spiritual system. And so there is no confusion of ancestors being up here with God, right? There is no worship of ancestors up here above God. It's ancestors are venerated, acknowledged here, and God, the supreme being, the Most High, is worshipped and highly reverenced and all of that way up here. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that clears that up a little bit. So what are the qualifications to becoming a venerated ancestor? Because there are qualifications. Not everybody just gets to hop on the shrine just because they passed away. There are qualifications in most of these religious traditions, African traditions. So the first is that they were an elder. Second, that they lived a morally good life. That's probably the first one, actually. That they lived a morally good life, right? Didn't have any issues. People liked them. They did well for the family, the community, maybe. They lived a good life. They died a natural death. They didn't die in a tragedy. They didn't die in an accident. They died a natural death. Usually they're male. Some female ancestors are venerated, but for the most part, it's male in some of these traditions. And that male has to be married and more than likely must have children or offspring. And so they are prayed to, libation is poured. And if you don't know what libation is the pouring out of some type of liquid and the calling of the ancestor's name. And so libation is usually poured. Prayers are offered up asking for favor from them, protection, anything that would help the community, the family, just making sure that the family is taken care of, right? Did they help take care of the family here on this side? Well, you continue to help take care of the family on the other side, basically. And then food is also offered, right? If you know, Black folk everywhere, I don't care where we are, food is so important to our gathering. It's so important to family events. It's so important to even like block parties. It's important to, I don't know, wherever we are. If you had a concert, more likely it's going to be some food there, especially if it's, primarily Black. You're going to have some type of food there. And that just is what it is. And so food is very important when you're talking about communing with the ancestors. In certain traditions, there are designated ancestral days where a meal is cooked specifically for the ancestors. Maybe it's your ancestor's birthday, one of the head ones, right? If it's your grandfather or someone like that, is his birthday, you might want to cook his favorite meal or something like that. That is something that is also offered. And it is also said that if some ancestors come and they don't have no food, there's gonna be some problems. So that's how important food is to us as a people. And let me see what else I have. Okay, so how did we get to the point where ancestral veneration is considered evil in the eyes of God, is considered a pagan practice? Like where did that come from? Because it's not in the Bible. Period. There's nothing about ancestral veneration in the Bible. In fact, if you've read the Bible, if you just Google ancestors in the Bible, there's a whole bunch of scriptures that come up that talk about ancestors, your fathers. Remember the ways of your ancestors. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember Moses, and remember what they didn't do. Pass it down to generation. Pass the instructions that you receive from Yahweh. Pass it down, right? All of this is talking about the importance of ancestors, the importance of understanding your lineage, understanding your culture, right? And all that is wrapped up into one thing, especially for the Hebrew and the Israelite people, right? Their spirituality, their culture, their family, all of that was a part of one. It wasn't separate from the other. And so that was very important. Even genealogies, right? Who came from who begat who. Even when you talk about Jesus and they prophesied that the Messiah would come through the line of David. And when you get to the New Testament and you start reading, you can read the genealogy of Jesus, so that it shows that prophecy came to be that Jesus came from the line of David. That's what's recorded there. And so ancestral lineage is very important. Do they talk specifically about the veneration of ancestors? Not necessarily. Do they say that it's negative to do so? No. So I have to imagine, and this is just my brain, if I'm thinking about the time period and the location of the Hebrew people at the time and their surroundings and the fact that they were an African people, this is originally an African tradition, that they probably did venerate their ancestors. I mean, they talked about them enough, right? That it wasn't an uncommon practice, especially where they came from and the time period in which they were in existence. It wasn't uncommon, or the time period of the Bible, if you will. It wasn't an uncommon practice. So that's just my imagination, that they did venerate ancestors, that they did acknowledge ancestors, and that they practiced that. Why wouldn't they, right? So that's my synopsis. However, why is it now considered something that we don't do? And I mean we specifically as Black people. And from what I gather, it really occurred when you do come into the times of colonization and enslavement. And Europeans either did not understand what was happening and they just labeled it as evil, pagan, and something that needed to be changed and eradicated, or they did understand and they recognized what that was, and they recognized the power and the connection that African people had to the spirit world, and they didn't want that to happen either. Either way, whatever the reasoning was, it did not benefit African people at all, and it did not benefit us, the generations to come from them at all, right? Whenever we turn our back on something that we have been doing that's innate to us, it's not just a practice that somebody gave to us, it's something that came from us. It was something that came from, I believe, came from God for us and the way we operated, right? And the reason why I believe it came from God, because Black people were the first people who were created by God. And if Black people were the first people created by God, then that means then Black people were the first people to know God, and Black people were the first people to receive instruction from God and to see God in nature and understand the manifestations and the characteristics of God through the physical realm, and understanding the link between spiritual, unseen, and physical, spiritual, right? And so that's just the way that my brain works, and that's how I think about it. And so I don't believe that anything that was innate to who our people were is evil, because if anything was innate to who our people were and how we operated, then that means that was innately divine and given to us by God as an expression of how we are to live in relation to what God has given us. So that's just my synopsis. Moving on, interestingly enough, in the post-apostolic era of Christianity, so this is right after the crucifixion of Christ, it is recorded that the early Christians, considered the first Christian group, it is recorded that during the time of persecution by Romans, that these early Christians would try to obtain the relics or the belongings or the remains of martyrs. And martyrs were Christians who were killed because of their belief in Christianity. And so they would try to obtain these relics and these remains and offer prayers and venerate the dead martyrs and venerate the dead Christians and prophets. And they would pray to them and ask for a favor, ask for them to pray on their behalf, because they believed that as powerful as they were here, that they were even still powerful in the spiritual realm. And so they were venerating the dead, and they witnessed miracles like healing. This is recorded. So the major underlying factor of this belief was of the resurrection of the dead, was in the belief that the spirit is not dead and that there is still power in the spirit of those who have power here. So this translated to the veneration of saints, right? So we have in the Catholic tradition, if you will, there is a veneration of saints, and all of them. Some of them are martyred, some of them were not. But there are plenty of saints that are now venerated within the Catholic tradition. Even the mother of Jesus, Mary, is highly venerated. Sometimes it seems like she's venerated more than Jesus is, but she's venerated, right? And they have relics, and they have candles, and they have pictures, and the like. And this is something that, and these candles and things that are shrines, literally shrines in the Christian church, they are shrines. And what does that model after? Well, that models after ancestral veneration, because what we have to understand is the timeline, right? Because a lot of the times we as Christians, we believe that everything started with Christianity. No, Christianity came on the scene well after ancient populations were already in effect. They were already practicing their traditional religions in the course, and even African traditional Christianity was well in effect before Europeans became Christians. Okay, so this timeline is that Christians had observed African ancestor veneration, understood that, and they transposed that onto their practice within Christianity. It's just like a child who sees their parent, right? If I have nieces and nephews, one thing they always want when they're a baby is they want a phone, because they see everybody on their cell phone. They see us all talking on their cell phone. Now, what do kids want? They want the phone. They even want their own phone. You give them your old phone so they can play with it, so they can act like you. Well, what do you think? That's what the Europeans were doing when they had observed what Africans were doing, and then they transposed that into their practices. So that is what I have found regarding what the Bible has to say about Christianity. What the Bible has to say about ancestral veneration. Really, there's nothing against it when we're talking about ancestral veneration. However, some of the arguments from Christians against ancestral veneration and saying that is ungodly are based on certain scriptures. So these scriptures I found, Deuteronomy 18, verses 10 through 13. And briefly, I'll read it. It says, "Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or a spiritist." In other translations, it says necromancer, which is someone who speaks with the dead, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out these nations before you. Also, Leviticus 19:31 says, "Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God." And so also you may be familiar with this scripture. It's 1 Samuel 28, 3 through 19. It's basically a little story about Saul. Saul was one of the kings of Israel. He was anointed by Samuel the prophet, and then Saul started tripping, and he was disobedient to the Lord Yahweh, and so the Lord left him and took his anointing from him. And so during this time, Saul was trying to gain insight from the Lord and direction from the Lord when the Philistines had set up camp. I believe it was the Philistines. Some opposing army had set up camp, and Saul was scared. And so the Lord was no longer talking to Saul. And interestingly enough, in this story, it says that Saul, he didn't come in a dream. He didn't come using Urim. And I don't know if you know about Urim, but when I've looked up Urim is a type of sacred lots. And if you know about lots, it's the casting of lots, and casting of lots is like divination. So if you hear about African traditional divination where people cast cowrie shells or coins or some type of element of nature, that is called divination. Well, apparently there was some type of sacred or approved divination that the kings and the priests could use who were of Yahweh. Interesting. Anyway, we'll talk about divination in another video. But God also didn't come to him through prophets either. So Saul was tripping out because the ways that he would hear from the Lord, he couldn't hear from the Lord. Subsequently, he went to find a medium. Now, he had cast out the mediums because that's what God told them to do. So he cast out all the mediums and the sorcerers and all of that. But then he asked someone to find him a medium. And they found him. Actually, he specifically asked for a woman who was a medium, which is interesting. But they found one in some nearby place. He went to them, and she knew what the rule was. And he was like, "Hey, She was like, you trying to get me killed. He was like, nah, don't you worry about it. She didn't know it was Saul. He had disguised himself some type of way. Anyway, he wanted to talk to Samuel. Samuel's like, hey, like, why have you disturbed me by calling me back? What do you want? The Lord ain't with you no more. That's just what it is. And Samuel continued to tell him that basically the kingdom was going to be given to David, and Saul and his sons were going to be killed, and join Samuel in the ancestral plane. And so, interestingly enough, is this specificity about calling forth the spirit of the dead for consulting through mediums. That is what the scripture says. It doesn't say for you not to venerate your ancestors. It says to consult. You are not to consult the spirits of the dead. For whatever reason, Yahweh did not like other people being able to consult the spirit of the dead. He knew people could do it, but he didn't want his people to do it. And I'm pretty sure they said, do not let those among you. I have to imagine that there were some people among them who were Israelites who had that ability to practice those things, and they weren't supposed to do it. And if they did do it, then they would either be killed or they would be cast out. So Yahweh, for whatever reason, did not approve of that practice. Okay, but it's not that he did not approve of the calling forth of spirits. This is what I have to say about that. So in 1 Kings 17 through 24, Elijah resurrected a widow's son. Elijah, as we know, is considered one of the baddest prophets in the Old Testament, and he resurrected a widow's son. How did he do this? He called on Yahweh to allow this boy to live, right? And then not only did he pray, he laid prostrate over the boy 3 times. He was practicing some healing practice. He just wasn't praying, right? He put these things into action. And so when he did this, he called on Yahweh. Yahweh either brought the spirit back into the boy, or during that action of laying on him, that allowed the spirit to come back into the boy. That's calling a spirit forth. Again, in Luke 7:11 through 17, Jesus resurrects a widow's son. In John 11:38 through 44, very popular, Jesus literally calls Lazarus forth. That man had been dead for 4 days. And the sister even said he's probably stinking. And Jesus literally called him forth out of the tomb. That means his spirit was elsewhere in another plane, and Jesus called that spirit on back into the body. Jesus resurrects Jairus' daughter. Jairus was, I think, a attendant in one of the synagogues. And then, very interestingly, in Matthew 17, 1 through 8, Jesus' transfiguration with Moses and Elijah. So this wasn't a resurrection. Jesus literally transfigured and was then communing with those dead ancestors, Moses and Elijah, having a good old conversation. He brought some of his disciples with him, and they were able to witness it. But it's very interesting that the calling of the spirits of those who are dead is not something that is necessarily forbidden. We have to read the scripture where it says using a medium to call forth the spirit of the dead for consultation. That's what the scripture says if you read it. So that, I hope that is clear. I hope ancestral veneration is something that you don't have to be scared of anymore. It's something that we can do as African people. It is something that is not in contradiction with Christianity as far as what I've learned. If you have learned anything, if you have anything to share, please let me know. I will put the resources, the articles, the scriptures, and the even books in the description box that I used specifically for this, or that I've used in the past just to gain knowledge. I'll link it in the description box below. I really hope that this video helped about what does the Bible and Christianity have to say about ancestral veneration. And this is just a beginning. This is just the beginning. Part of this series. We'll definitely have some more in-depth videos just strictly on ancestral veneration or ancestors in general, because I believe there's so much more to learn and to dive into. So until next time, bye.